Hello, my name's Gavin, this is Genre Books, and this is my third weekly wrap-up for Rocket Summer for 2025. Rocket Summer is a Booktube event created by Michael K. Vaughan. This is the second year the event is running, and the premise is fairly simple. Read vintage science fiction. On a weekly basis, in the first week we read science fiction from the very beginning up until 1939. Week 2, 40 to 49, week 3, the week I'm talking about today, 50 to 59, and the 1960s for the final week. The 1950s is really where science fiction explodes in popular culture. We have all the invaders from Mars stories and infiltrating cinema. We have the flying saucer craze really taking off. We have films like Forbidden Planet and This Island Earth becoming mainstream blockbusters. And we have the end of reading Exploring Other Worlds, edited by Sam Moskowitz. The last stories in here were from the 1950s, so I can put this on the red pile. I am this year concentrating more on short stories, and the two from Exploring Other Worlds began with Garden in the Void by Paul Anderson. In this story, Jim and Marion are prospecting in the asteroid belt. It doesn't seem to be a very lucrative existence, but there's the dream, the eternal dream of the prospector, of striking it rich, looking for gold in those rocks. But what they find isn't gold, it's actually green. They see an asteroid which looks to have vegetation. This is, as you might understand, quite unusual. So they go in for a closer look. How did this vegetation get there? How is it maintained? They have a quick look round, metaphorically scratch their heads because they're in space helmets and can't do it for real, and because of their limited oxygen can only spend a short time exploring before they decide to head back to their rocket. And then outside the rocket they find a figure. This is an individual who has been marooned on this asteroid for years and has developed a symbiotic relationship with the vegetation on the asteroid in some bizarre ways. They need to rescue this man. He seems rather unwilling to go. The next story, and the one that allowed me to finish Exploring Other Worlds, was by Frederick Brown, who I think I mentioned last week. I am enjoying more as I read him. In Something Green, we follow McGarry, who has been stranded on the planet Kruger 3. He's crash landed some years ago. Due to the local flora, due to the sun, the particular sun for this planet, McGarry has not seen green vegetation in years, and he is really hankering after it. Everything is shades of red on this planet. He's been stranded, as I've said, for years. He is methodically going through the jungle, killing the more violent animals that live there, but joined by one local animal who he's named Dorothy. It's sort of described a little bit like Thing from the Addams Family. It's a hand-shaped thing that is sitting on his shoulder. McGarry is looking for another craft he knows had crash landed on this planet a few years before he did. He doesn't know where it is. His equipment is destroyed, so he can't scan for it. So he is just exploring the planet in the hope of finding the other craft to give him the spare parts to allow him to leave the planet on his own. It's at this point that he sees another spacecraft overhead, signals it, flags it down, and looks to see if he can get a ride home. He's then told some bad news about what has happened since he's been away. Moving on from the Moskowitz book to the Science Fiction Hall of Fame, edited by Robert Silverberg. There is a plethora of stories here from the 1950s, and I'm starting with C.M. Kornbluth. The story is called The Little Black Bag, and I think this story actually was adapted. I think it was The Twilight Zone. I think it might have been One Step Beyond, but it was turned into a TV show, or a one-off TV show. This is a time travel story, but we don't have an individual travelling through time here. Rather, a little bit like a story I read last week, Mimsy or the Borogroves. This is an item being sent back into the past from the future. But unlike Mimsy with the Borogroves, there seems to be some use to these objects that are sent back. What we have is a medical kit being sent back to someone who has medical training. I say medical training. Everyone in this time period seems to have lost a lot of skill. The IQ seems to have plummeted in Kornbluth's version of Earth here. This doctor isn't someone you would really trust to treat you. Not that any of them seem to be any better, but this particular individual is so bad that he has been struck off from practicing medicine, and as a result, when we first see him, he is on Skid Row. He doesn't care about anybody or anything, but wakes up from with an almighty hangover to find this shiny medical kit waiting for him. His initial thought is to take it to the pawn shop, get some cash, get some more booze. But someone sees him with the medical kit and asks for help. And they're going to pay him to help. He has those dollar signs in his eyes and basically goes there knowing that if he's caught practicing medicine, he's in real trouble, but knowing that with a little bit of flim-flam, he can squeeze a couple of dollars out of this poor woman who is worried about her daughter. And he begins to pretend to treat her, but when he opens the medical kit, he finds that he really can treat her. There are simple instructions to follow, and this medical kit is like Mary Poppins' bag. It has everything in it. It expands, and very quickly he is able to bring a very sick girl back to full health. Someone who knows this doctor knows that something is up here and basically blackmails him into a cut of the proceeds from pawning this medical kit. They go to try and pawn the medical kit, but because it is just nothing anyone's seen before, they're not going to be given any real money for it. So they come up with a better idea. They can treat people. They begin a real medical practice, and he becomes very successful. But this success is all built on not really understanding what's going on with this medical kit. I did like the story from C.M. Kornbluth. The only Kornbluth I've read before have been his novels with Fred Pohl, so the Space Merchants and Gladiator at Law, and it has a flavour of that madcap energy. But there's a little bit of something else going on here. There's a little bit of redemption for more than one character, and there is some excoriating satire on the loss of skill in our modern age. The next story I read was Born of Man and Woman from Richard Matheson. This is 3.5-4 pages long. I can't say anything about it without spoiling it. It is very brief, it is horror tinged, packs a bit of a punch, and well worth the 5-10 minutes it would take to read it. In last week's Roundup, I spoke about a Judith Merrill story which was beginning to talk about the horrors of the aftermath of a nuclear exchange. In the 50s, this narrative really did pick up steam, and we have next Coming Attraction from Fritz Leiber. This is post-nuclear war. A character is visiting from the UK to the US. He's trying to do some kind of business deal in order to get some food back to the UK. He's in New York, where an H-bomb had been dropped previously. This is a story of austerity, degradation, the need to wear face masks has expanded into a moral code for only the women to wear face masks. So all the women are going with their faces covered, and there is almost like a morality police patrolling the streets. This kind of traducing of women's rights always comes with an unhealthy dose of hypocrisy. So whilst everyone is very moralistic about having to have women covered up, they're happy to watch women wrestling, and women wrestling men. And our character, who is an Englishman in New York, he's already a bit of a fish out of water, doesn't really understand about this culture, falls a little bit foul of it, and no one really comes out of the story in a glowing way. Quite a sort of depressing and nihilistic story. Enjoyable nonetheless. But the aftermath of nuclear war is the subject of the next story too, in a different way. This is Anthony Boucher and the quest for Saint Akin. Organised religion in this post-apocalyptic future, which is actually our past, has been banned. So there is no organised religion allowed other than sort of a reverence for the ruling technocracy. The papacy has gone underground. A fugitive pope sends our main character Thomas on a mission to validate the sainthood of a candidate called Akin. And there's some interesting ideas here. He's sent away to California to validate this sainthood. It's an undercover mission, and he's being sent on a robotic donkey, which Thomas discovers, to his amazement, can talk. To you or me, having a robotic donkey may seem amazing enough, but it is when it begins to talk that Thomas really begins to pay attention. This mode of conveyance, this talking mode of conveyance, has been gifted by a wealthy individual who seems to want to help the underground papacy. But we're not really sure whether this whether this donkey is a bit of a sleeper agent with different designs as well. He's certainly, as a robot, able to argue logically against Thomas. I really did like this story. It's a nice bit of world building. It's absolutely off the wall in its descriptions, but the very idea of the biggest organised religion in the world having to sort of go underground and act in a manner for sort of subterfuge to try and bring some faith back to a war-ravaged populace is a nice scenario. The next story I read was Surface Tension by James Blish. This story is a possible antecedent to Children of Time by Adrian of Tchaikovsky, which I read earlier this year. We start with a seed ship which has been sent to an uninhabited planet but has crash landed. The planet is completely waterbound, other than a small outcropping of rock where the ship has landed. The crew's purpose is to engineer life which can survive on the planet, and they imbue it with knowledge of humanity. But on this planet, the best they can do is tiny, microscopic life. But they do it. And the rest of the story follows many, many generations later, the society that has been built up microns big, but with huge humanity type ideas, and a instruction manual, a book of almost religious significance left to them by the scientists, of which certain parts are missing. But these tiny creatures go on a voyage of discovery to see if there is anything outside of the water that they inhabit. But as the name of the story suggests, breaking that water barrier may be more difficult than it sounds to you or I. And for the 1950s, the hits keep coming. The next story was Arthur C. Clarke. So the first time he's appeared for me in this year's Rocket Summer. This short story, The 9 Billion Names of God. Again, another story that is too short to recap it without giving it away. But I think this short story may have one of the best ending lines in a short story that I've ever read. Highly recommended. The next story, I think, is one that most people know, but probably not read. Jerome Bixby's It's a Good Life. This story adapted for an episode of The Twilight Zone, probably the most famous episode of The Twilight Zone. The adaptation is surprisingly faithful to this original story. The world has been reduced to a single village in thrall to the godlike powers of an impetuous, vindictive child. The only main difference in the Twilight Zone adaptation is that Anthony, the boy, is 6 or 7 years old, whereas here in this original story he is only 3. A story showing us the danger of putting an angry toddler in charge of the world. A lesson we have singularly failed to heed. The next story was The Cold Equations by Tom Godwin. This is from 1954. It's a fairly grim and unmerciful, hard science fiction. A small rescue ship has been dispatched from a larger ship to go and bring medicine to a colony. Things are done on a shoestring, and this ship has only enough fuel. It has been minutely worked out, the payload versus the distance needing to be travelled. So when the pilot finds there is a stowaway, there is only one course of action. In fact, he is mandated by the laws of this space future to take this stowaway and turf him out of the airlock with no ceremony at all. The stowaway turns out to be a teenage girl, which rather changes things for the pilot. And a teenage girl wanting to visit her brother, who is one of the colonists who has come recently from Earth and is ignorant of these rules. She knows she's done something wrong, but she has no idea that the penalty for doing that is so final. The next story was Fondly Fahrenheit by Alfred Bester. And you could see where this story was going from a fairly early point. But it does attempt some interesting ways of telling the story. We have a man who has been left a legacy from a father who had sort of failed in his business. The only thing of value he had left to bequeath was a robot, but it's a robot with a significant glitch. This seems to be a universe where Isaac Asimov's 3 laws of robotics are supposed to hold strong. This robot does not subscribe to those laws and cheerfully goes into a homicidal mode. Apparently, when it feels like it, apparently out of nowhere, but it's a simple temperature gauge issue. Where this story gets interesting is in the robot's relationship with its owner. The owner seems to want to protect this robot, partly out of self-interest because the robot is what makes him money. Without that, he'd actually have to work himself. But the robot is constantly carrying out outrages, which means the owner has to up sticks and leave poorer and poorer each time to try and scratch a living out in a universe where he is now on the run. Why is he protecting the robot? It must be more than money. The link between the human and the robot seems stronger than that. The way the story is written, with constantly switching perspectives from and narration from first, third person. Who are we talking about sometimes? Who is acting in a homicidal manner? Is it the robot? Is it the owner? Not always successful, but it does keep it interesting at the beginning, a little bit confusing until you sort of see what the author is trying to do. I think if you try to work it all out, you'd spend too much time on this story. I sort of just went with the flow, and it's entertaining enough, although I don't think it's Bester's best work, which I'll prove shortly. But the final short story I read was The Country of the Kind from Damon Knight. Damon Knight is probably better known as a science fiction editor, but he did write a fair amount, and he knows his science fiction history. The Country of the Kind is surely an homage to H.G. Wells's The Country of the Blind, where a man who has vision in a world where people don't have vision is a little bit put out to find that he is not the king-like figure he would be expecting to be. In The Country of the Kind, we have a man who is animalistic, atavistic, violent, in a world where violence has been eradicated. eradicated to such an extent that the society can't kill this individual, even though this individual has killed. Instead, his punishment is threefold. He's I don't know if it's a chip he's fitted with, or something is done to him, which means that whenever he's about to commit an act of violence, he has something akin to an epileptic seizure which prevents him from doing so. The second part of his punishment is that he has been sent to Coventry by the entire society. And actually, I don't know if "sent to Coventry" is a phrase that translates to the US, but he's been ostracized. He's been excommunicated. You cannot deal with or acknowledge this man's existence, which doesn't do a lot for his mood. But it makes him think he's sort of king of the world, because he's the only person in the world who can do what he likes, and people let him do what he likes because they can't interact with him. But he knows that he's got limitations. The third part of the punishment is possibly the most unusual, for people to realise who he is and steer clear of him. He gives off an awful odour. He can't detect it, everybody else can. And the punishment is, for a society which purports to be so kind, quite cruel and unusual. The man needs a different kind of treatment to the one they are giving him. But he goes along thinking that he is king of the world, and is constantly trying to get other people to join him because all of the freedom that he thinks he has. An interesting enough story. Outside of short stories, I read, and this is from 1959, Nigel Neal, The Quatermass Experiment. I'll be doing a full video on this book and its sequel in another video coming up later this week. The final book for 1950s Rocket Summer is, I think, the one I enjoyed the most. Alfred Bester, The Demolished Man. I think this work 10 times better than the short story, Fondly Fahrenheit. I think I even rate this book higher than the other most famous Alfred Bester novel, Tiger, Tiger, or as it's known in the USA, The Stars, My Destination. This is a world where telepathy exists. They're called peepers. It's not endemic in the population. There are only a certain amount of people that can do it. There are different levels of telepathy, and the stronger the power, the fewer people there are who are able to wield it. And our main character has none of that power, but he has that other superpower, which is the same everywhere. He's incredibly wealthy, so he's able to employ as many of these peepers as he can manage. He nearly has a near monopoly on certain industries, but there is one person holding out, and he realizes that to have a complete monopoly, he has to kill this person. But there hasn't been a murder on Earth for 70 odd years, and there hasn't because there've been telepaths who can tell when someone's going to do something like this. So elements of a Minority Report in here. Like Tiger, Tiger, or The Stars, My Destination, Bester, although writing in the 1950s, feels in these two books more like a precursor to cyberpunk. He is, for all of the science fiction writers I've read from this decade, the one who feels most ahead of his time. Something which, although I'm reading it 70 years after its publication, still feels futuristic. Not obviously in every way, but the world he builds is both recognizable and something which could still happen, telepathy aside. It does lose its way a little bit in the last 20-30 pages, which stops it from being a perfect novel, but I think in a number of ways it gets pretty close. It just has a lot of stuff, something interesting almost on every page. Typographically, this is possibly the most interesting book I've read in quite some time too. The conversations between the telepaths, Bester takes a really good stab at portraying these. There are different ways to read these sections of text. You're not quite sure who's speaking, what direction they're speaking in. There are multiple ways to approach each of those pages. Here is one example, almost set out like lists, but can be read down and across. This is 30 years before Excel spreadsheets. You have people, the more experienced practitioners, almost able to create shapes out of the thoughts that they're transmitting, which in itself gives another message. And you have, when a group of them get together, these sort of spider diagrams of conversations which can be read up, down, left, right, and diagonally. There's no linear structure to those conversations, and it gives that impression which the book bears out, that a 5-minute conversation can happen in half a second because just the transference of thoughts. So it was good to end the 50s on such a high note with a book that I enjoyed so much. But there hasn't been much I haven't enjoyed so far in Rocket Summer. Let's hope the 1960s keeps that run going. But until next time,